I'm coming to you again with another underrated movie, and this one today is going to be Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. I find this one to be, in particular, a little bit underrated because Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King came out that same year, and so it kind of swept the Oscars as far as everything else, and I think as a result this film kind of got swept a little bit under the bus. So I just wanted to kind of bring it to people's attention if people haven't heard of it. Um, Basically, the movie stars Russell Crowe as Jack Aubrey, who is a commander of a naval ship during the Napoleonic Wars, and where he is on the side of the English. And basically, the plot follows his ship and all of his crew as they try to catch a particular French ship that they wish to take up as a prize in order to sort of gain an advantage for England in the war. And I think this film in particular I found really good was also not by just the acting, but how they set everything up to make everything really realistic. I really felt like I was there. I was like back in the day in like the early 1800s when this war was taking place. It felt really realistic, and that's what I really liked about it. Another thing that I found interesting too is that not a lot of movies, at least from what I can tell, really base things on the Navy. A lot of the time, war films technically tend to go into the battleground on land and never really go out at sea so much. And if they do go out at sea, it's usually with submarines and high-tech equipment. And with this, they don't really have much. Again, this is back in the 1800s. You will see in the film, and this part of the film kind of disturbed me a little bit, is that there's actually a little boy, and there are like younger kids on this ship, which I found surprising too. And you will see how limited their technology was, because literally this boy's hand has to get clean off because it's going to get infected if they leave the hand on. And to see that happen to like a little kid was sort of shocking me, and I thought it was interesting how they were just so limited on the amount of resources that they had. But what it tends to focus on is on a lot of characters as well. But for the most part, it focuses on Russell Crowe's character, and also the doctor, whose name is Stephen Maturing, and he's played by Paul Bettany. And basically, his character is very interesting because he's a doctor. Again, he's not really like a Navy type guy, and you'll see like how Russell Crowe is like really a Navy type guy. He looks up to the Navy. He thinks that the Navy is the greatest thing to him. And the doctor has just a different personality. He's more interested in finding natural things. He's more interested in life than in combat and winning in a naval fight. And you'll kind of see how their personalities clash a little bit, but at the same time they still have this sort of friendship, and I found that to be very interesting and very well done on both the actors' parts. Another thing that I found that this film did a good job of was just presenting how literally they are sort of this group of people, and how these groups of people end up clashing. And it kind of shows people's desperations, and you'll see some people maybe go completely off the edge of how they're supposed to be, how the whole system of the ship is supposed to function, because again, it's kind of like a small little island of people, because basically pretty much the whole story takes place on the ship. And when you have these people on the ship, you need to have sort of like this order and this structure. And clearly Russell Crowe's character tries to emphasize that there needs to be this structure. And you'll see how sometimes that structure is broken because sometimes people can't deal with that structure. And for the most part, I liked how the action was done. It just felt so realistic, and I really liked the costuming and how they made you just feel like you were in this time period. And I like how they didn't make anything really clean or pretty looking. They tried to make it like it was actually that time period. I really in particular liked the Doctor's character because I thought that he showed this kind of side of wanting to explore nature, and we get to see them at one point going on the Galapagos Island because, again, they're fighting sort of in the Brazilian territory, so to speak, in the Pacific. So, or I think, is it the Pacific or the Atlantic side? I'm not sure. It might actually be the Atlantic, but they're on the Brazilian area. So I always forget where the Galapagos Islands exactly are, but they do go on them, and they do kind of show you how we sort of, as a society as a human race at this point in time, we're sort of transitioning into using things not just for warfare, but for science. You'll see how the Doctor tries to collect animals, and how he wants to exhibit animals, to show people animals. So you'll see this kind of shift in the way we look at exploration, because a lot of exploration that was really done back then was for like naval purposes. It was for to fight. It wasn't for to go out and find animals. But to see that kind of happening in the movie, I thought was interesting because it wasn't just about fighting. It had something. It was interesting about it because it was going on within this time period that allowed for this exploration to take place and allowed for a lot of advancement. Charles Darwin even went on a ship that took him to Galapagos Islands that was intended for exploration, but these ships are intended for naval purposes. And you kind of see how these things kind of mix together. Russell Crowe at one point sort of uses like what the Doctor finds, and he tries to incorporate that into how they do naval tactics. So for the most part, I thought that was interesting to see that kind of blend. And I also thought that the ships were just really cool. I mean, I liked how they looked. They just looked real. They didn't look really fake at all. They looked like real ships. And you felt like you were on these ships. And when it was hot, you did feel like it was hot. When it was cold, it felt like it was cold. And wet when it was wet. And they do go through with you like these different times that they are on the ship. And it gives you a really in-depth atmosphere, at least I think, of what it's like. And I thought it was interesting because not a lot of movies do this. Not a lot of movies go for this time period and go for this this particular kind of warfare. And I thought it was interesting to see that come to life. Now, this particular film is actually based upon 3 novels, I believe, that are by Patrick O'Brian. And it basically, the novels, which I guess are a total of 20, they cover the main character, the played by Russell Crowe, Jack Aubrey's entire naval experience. But I guess Jack Aubrey is like a fictional character. He wasn't an actual person. But for the most part, from what I could gather, is that I think it portrayed the time period and the experiences that these men probably had fairly realistically. And I think if you are into this sort of thing, if you're into exploration, if you're into, sort of a journey type film, you will probably like this. However, this ending, although they do go out to set the mission they were responsible for, still some loose ends are kind of left, and it's sort of like it gives the audience a feeling of like that, the journey is never really over. It's like they have one mission and then they go on another mission. It's almost like it's an endless game, at least for Russell Crowe's character and for everybody else involved with him. And it's just a never-ending kind of struggle. So at first you might be thinking, oh, it's trying to go for a sequel, but I don't think it is. Now that I know that this movie is just really old, and I don't think that they would even bother trying to bring a sequel back. I just don't think that would work. But for the most part, I found it rather interesting how they captured a good chunk of this character, at least, and for the most part, I thought it was interesting how they don't leave you with this like ultimate like satisfactory ending. It's sort of like the journey goes on ending. It's not a completely wrapped up, tied up in a bow Disney, happy ending. It's kind of, they set out what they plan to do, but there's room for more. It's just a never-ending kind of game. So just kind of be prepared for that kind of ending. Some people may not like that, but for me, I think it works for this movie. So for the most part, I think that can be said. Is it as good as Lord of the Rings series? Well, I'll leave that up for you to decide. I'm not saying that it is. I personally don't think it is, in a sense, but I think it still has some things to offer, and I think it's something that people should just look more into. Again, underrated films are not meant to be films that I look at and say, yeah, this is such as great as so-and-so movie, or this is great as so-and-so movie. I think every movie is unique in its own special way, or movie series, and I think this one, and it was nominated for Best Picture that same year, it just never became kind of really looked into, and I thought for the most part it was a decent film. I mean, I was sucked into it, and I thought it was interesting, and I liked the sort of history and how we were discovering things about our natural world, and we were really like looking at things through a different lens than all the other times in history beforehand. So this was a great. This is just a great part of our history, for Western history in particular, and yeah, I mean, I think that's really all I can say. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I'm more than happy to answer them. But for the most part, I really enjoyed this movie, and I really want to find the other movie that Paul Bettany is in, and I think it's called Creation, and he plays Charles Darwin, and I really wanted to see that. I thought that sounds interesting. It's just I can't find it anywhere. But if I do find it, I definitely want to see if I can view it. But yeah, I think this is worth checking out. If you haven't seen it, click on Netflix or whatever you have and feel free to watch it if it's something that sounds interesting. So yeah, I think that's really all I can say about this film. Again, questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them, and until next time, bye bye.